Welcome back. I am now joined by a powerhouse within the conservation space. She is the director of Paws South Africa, Fiona. She is also a driving force within that organization and a movement whose time has come. We've seen an inversion where purpose-driven movements now have the ground they need. And we're going to connect with her right now to get a very real take on where the big cat situation is here in South Africa and globally, and where the opportunities are. Fiona, very good to see you in this context. Thank you so much for joining us. It feels like the time is right. I know you've been fighting this fight for quite a while now, so for you, the time has always been right.
Absolutely.
To take up arms, take action, and do something about it. I think all I needed to prompt me into action were the numbers. So let's start there with the dark half of this narrative. How many big cats are in captivity in South Africa right now, and what is going to happen to them?
Right now, there are an estimated 12,000 big cats in captivity in South Africa across about 400 breeding farms that are actively breeding these animals for commercial purposes.
12,000. How many lions, tigers exist in the wild right now? Here in South Africa, how many lions exist in wild spaces?
There's basically a quarter of that number, so about 2,500 to 3,000 lions are in the wild spaces in South Africa, which is absolutely so disheartening. There are 4 times that amount in captivity, and we're commercially breeding them. South Africa is the biggest exporter of lions and big cats and their parts and derivatives from anywhere around the world. And it obviously has a huge impact on our wildlife.
Yeah, we put up a poster saying, come to South Africa to see the big five. But the truth is, come to South Africa to buy meat from the big five. This says to me that there is far more structure, commerce, motivation in that completely unknown sector of how badly this is playing out. When we talk about the global connection to this, where do we sit in the global ecosystem in terms of supplying these parts? And we're talking about lions and leopards and tigers being sold for meat and body parts. Where do we sit in the global ecosystem?
Being the biggest exporter of big cats and their parts and derivatives, or even live animals from anywhere around in the world, we're sending these animals to Southeast Asia, to the UAE, and various other parts of the world. Most recently, a cheetah to India. So it's really, we're playing a huge role in sending these animals that are captive bred. They have no conservation value whatsoever. And the impact that this is having on the natural range states of some of these animals, for example, tiger, is huge, because we're creating this demand and using up all the natural resources, and so having to falsify that by intensive breeding.
This looks like ecotourism. To the rest of the world, we look at the South African wildlife narrative, ecotourism. Come and pet a baby lion. What is that hiding? How have we gotten to the point that something that is so legitimate, that has legislation built around it to make sure that it is okay, has gotten to this point? Do you think the world is aware of the degree to which we have allowed this narrative to play out?
I don't think that the world is unaware. I think that there has to be much more action taken. So, for example, when we do make people aware and we reveal all the atrocities and we show people what's going on and sign a petition, which of course people want to sign, but then it stops there. And so the mechanism of changing the legislation that's required to end captive breeding in South Africa, the wheels are so slow in terms of motioning and seeing an end to it. Right now, South Africa is busy with a process where there's a sort of a ministerial task team that's in place looking at pathways and different opportunities for the exit and the voluntary exit of this industry. So at first, they're taking the voluntary approach. And I think that because there's so much commerce built around this, as you said, it's not going to be so easy to voluntarily exit from this and say, please, by all means, take my assets, which these animals are seen as.
And we need to accept that
Exactly.
this is money to the entities that are farming and selling.
Correct. So please take my assets and I'll voluntarily give them up. That's not really going to happen. It's not viable. So what kind of incentives can we provide, and what makes sense for some of these facilities, and not all will participate, but some of these facilities to actually turn around and say, we want to turn our business around and we want to make something else out of this, as opposed to intensive breeding for commercial purposes. What else can such a facility look like? And that's currently the discussions that are underway, but those wheels are turning very, very slowly. And at the same time, more and more animals are being bred every single day into these same circumstances where their welfare is of a huge concern to us.
Waiting for legislation to solve any problem is not going to happen. We're well aware that government doesn't represent the masses. Certainly within the South African context, only around 10 million South Africans actually vote. So we understand everything needs to align together. And I have a feeling that the social development element and the notion that how we take care of our wild spaces, yes, it used to be emotional. Now it is an indicator of a healthy community, of a healthy ecosystem beyond the wild. What then needs to shift and change? Do we need to change perceptions in the East? We talk about supply and demand. Yes, we know that there is a massive demand, but it feels like we are fueling the supply to create the demand. Do we need to change hearts and minds in the East, in those areas that are absorbing a lot of this produce, seeing as we're talking about farming, let me use that word? Or do we need to just cut the system off, just make it a basis point that South Africa does not farm animals that should exist in the wild? Seeing as we've built our entire national brand around the notion of the Big Five, come here and see our animals, not buy the meat, but come and see the animals. Where does the battle line need to be drawn?
The battle line needs to be drawn here at the supply. We need to, as South Africa, absolutely stop the captivity, stop the breeding, and stop the supply of these animals. How on earth are we going to change the demand side when that is being fueled by so many other illegal and criminal activities, is being fueled by so much ego and social media? We've seen so many instances of people who've bought lions and tigers from South Africa that are, parading them around, on leashes, in social media, sort of purchasing these animals for their own gain and their own ego. So I really think that South Africa should stop it. If we want to keep our reputation as the conservation country and be the gateway to Africa and be a leader within the African continent, surely we should stop our bad practices.
We are underselling it when we talk about captive breeding and, so-called ecotourism. That's probably a lie, not just underselling. If this was all being done within strict regulations, within safe environments, you could almost, and I know we ask this question when we work in any animal-driven produce space, there is such a strict command on the regulations around the slaughtering of any other animal within a commercial, because that is owned. What are the conditions like in the majority of these 400 odd farms that are now producing animal parts from our big cats? What does that look like?
Well, if I take it for the conditions of the animals, in many cases, these animals are not being kept in a species-appropriate manner. So from the food that they eat to the veterinary care that they may not be receiving, these little cubs are being taken away from their mothers at birth and being used for cub petting. They're being hand-raised by volunteers who are paying an enormous amount of money to do that. They're being walked with in these sort of walk with lion opportunities, and they end up back in the breeding cycle. They end up back in the trophy hunting industry. And we have to do something to break this vicious cycle. We've got to do something to end this, because the conditions for the animals themselves, and who can't speak for themselves, is really atrocious. And then more worrying for me not only the welfare of the animals, but as worrying for me is the welfare of the people who are actually working there, who require a job. Not about the ownership of the facility, but about the people who have to work there, where there's no concern for their welfare in terms of safety, in terms of standards and procedures, in terms of everything else. So when you hear news reports of somebody being mutilated or attacked or killed by a tiger or a lion, not only does that person's family get severely, traumatized by that, and the community itself.
Cat gets killed.
And then the cat gets killed. So the community is in an outroar, that family's traumatized, and then the animal is killed at the same time. So who's winning? There's no, regardless of regulations, the system doesn't work, and we have to change it systemically.
How many animals are going to die this year if we don't do anything?
I'm afraid to even put a number to that, because there's a number of animals that die for various reasons. It's not only from the hunting, it's not only from malnutrition or poor keeping, but what about the animals that are currently being produced and their lives? So a number can't actually even be put to this, because it's not only the animals alive right now, but those that are pregnant and or conceiving and or that are currently being born. And so the number is more than just a few, a handful a day or whatever the case may be. It's exponential.
It's an entire species. And I get a sense that we might have gone too far with tiger. There just isn't enough land and biodiversity for them. How long do you think before lions reach critical mass? If 4 times the amount of wild lions are sitting waiting to be slaughtered, essentially, how close to that ground, that day zero, do you think we are?
Again, it's very difficult, because the argument from the industry is that, well, captive breeding is then protecting the wild population, because it means that then the focus is off of the wild population. But that is not true. The wild population in itself is being protected within the conservation situation. And because we keep driving this supply and demand situation, there's poaching that's going on, targeting people who need the money. The poacher, the desperation. It's bringing that in. So human-wildlife conflict will exist, and there's some things that need to obviously improve in that space, in the conservation space. But in terms of poaching, there's a demand for it, so it will consistently happen until we put a stop to it. So that is sort of the bottom line. And if we don't stop the breeding now, it's just going to continue.
To round this off, it feels like the world has shifted dramatically, and you must feel that in your space, being purpose-driven. You represent now, thankfully, not just an organization that, yes, has global affiliations, a mothership that is incredibly powerful and has reach within the global context. It feels like the world has shifted towards individuals being driven by purpose. And we see this at the very highest level of government. We see it within the social media space. We are looking at a very different matrix for these kinds of narratives to play out. And with the connectedness between organizations, between these purposes, is this your time? Are you feeling more hopeful now, or do you feel more pessimistic in light of the numbers that you've just revealed to us? Where is your heart?
My heart is very much filled with hope at this moment in time. And I think the reason why is because of the fact that things are shifting and changing. People have realized that we're not all disconnected. Through the COVID pandemic, of course, people have become kinder. They've reached out. They've wanted to help each other. And I think that understanding that there's such a connection between our environment, ourselves as people, and animals, that interconnectedness and that idea that if we can't solve one issue without solving all the issues. And therefore I'm hopeful, because it brings us all together, not just because I work for animal welfare or you work for social development, but we work towards a common purpose and a common movement for a world where humans treat animals with respect, empathy, and understanding, which is the vision of 4 Paws. But it should be humans treat humans with respect, empathy, and understanding. Humans treat the environment and Mother Earth with the same respect, empathy, and understanding. And I think that concept of one welfare is really what gives me a lot of hope at this moment in time, because the lions are our driving purpose at the moment, because they're an apex predator. They represent so much good about.
There's a totem.
They are. But there's so many other layers. There's climate issues. There's pandemics and how that affects all of us, and where animals are the conduit for these issues. All of these different layers need to be addressed, but they can't be addressed in isolation. We have to see them all together.
Fiona, thank you for fighting this good fight to the degree that you have for as long as you have without very much support. So I'm going to say thank you as well to those benefactors and for Paws as a global organization for driving this, but individually, the members of your team who do this without being asked, without the need for validation, that deserves a massive, massive sense of gratitude. So thank you so much for doing what you're doing. This has been both terrifying and very inspirational at the same time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
The bottom line is, a country like South Africa that has built its global brand image around being that destination of choice to come and see and experience true wildlife, the big five, the animals that we place as the most coveted within the natural ecosystem. We are also selling their parts for meat more than any other country in the world. That's our country. That's South Africa. That says to me, it is time to hold up a mirror and rethink this system. It's time to introduce new drivers where not just the animals are winning, but the people are winning as well, because that's the only way we are going to get this equation right. Thank you so much to 4Paws South Africa and all of the organizations who are driving this notion of one welfare. We do have a common thread, and it's our mother. It's our Mother Earth.